This is a meeting we're starting now. We will definitely be done by 6 o'clock. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jim Boyd, who will also welcome you and start the agenda.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for your interest in the CRMC's Narragansett Bay Special Area Management Plan, in particular, this aquaculture element. First off, we recognize the keen interest of shoreside property owners, recreational users of the bay, municipal officials, and other stakeholders for the siting of new aquaculture within the bay, which includes the Sakonnet River. There's been some interest in particular about the CRMC notification process. And so to further enhance that, we are imminently launching the Rhode Island Aquaculture Listserv, where any person can go to the CRMC webpage and you can sign up to be notified for any aquaculture application, meeting notices, and this would include preliminary determinations as well. We have multiple meeting lists at the CRMC, some as a general mailing list. People just want to be informed about what's happening with CRMC general meetings or policy initiatives. We have meeting lists sometimes for particular applications. So the effort of creating this aquaculture listserv is to have everything in one place. So you can sign up in one location and be notified of any aquaculture project. We're working right now with state IT personnel to get this launched. We're hoping to do so in the next couple of days. And again, there'll be more information up on the CRMC website here shortly. So the goal of our aquaculture element working group here is development of this particular element to guide aquaculture through the CRMC regulatory process in an effort to minimize potential impacts on natural resources and existing uses within the bay. This is in keeping, by the way, with the CRMC's statutory obligations to ensure that marine aquaculture is conducted within state waters in a way that is consistent with the best interests of the public, with particular consideration of the impacts on the free and common fishery, navigation, and the marine environment. And the aquaculture working group here will assist the CRMC in this goal. So many people have asked, what is the role of the aquaculture working group? Well, it's an ad hoc working group. It serves in an advisory capacity to the CRMC. It has no regulatory authority. It has no legal authority. So it's not subject to the Open Meetings Act notification requirements. However, when we get to a point where the recommendations of this advisory group works its way up through CRMC, we will also then begin a public workshop process. And this will be an opportunity for even wider stakeholder input. And this is well before the CRMC begins any regulatory process. This is an informal process right now. We're trying to be as inclusive and as transparent as possible. And when we get to a point where we have some recommendations on an aquaculture siting map and some regulatory text that would go with that, then we will begin a formal rulemaking process. And again, that will happen after we conduct some preliminary public workshops to get further input. And once we begin the formal rulemaking process, that will require a 30-day public notice and comment period. The CRMC Coastal Council will hold a public hearing, and then there'll be a subsequent meeting for the council to consider and deliberate on adoption of any proposed map and regulatory elements. So that is the role of the aquaculture element working group. So with that, Jen, I'll pass that off on to you.
Great. And Jim, just to point out what you're saying while I'm pulling up my slide, is that this working group, again, it's informal. It's an informal process that CRMC doesn't necessarily have to do, right? So, so this is something that CRMC sees as something that is of value. And so as an effective process to respond to the issues of the people of Rhode Island. Is that accurate?
That is an accurate statement.
Okay, great. So I'm assuming people can see my screen. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to drill down on some of the components of this aquaculture element. But many have asked, what is this process? How long is it going to take? And again, as Jim mentioned, this is a very, the goal of this is to be responsive and to be practical. And so our best guess as far as the process and how we're going to do this is what I have here on the screen. So like we're doing right now, we are in the process of identifying what are the issues of concern, what is stirring the blood, both from an aquaculture grower's perspective, a resource user's perspective, or a municipality, or even a researcher who's been researching the Bay for a long time and has some concerns about where potentially aquaculture should or should not be sited. So the idea over the next few months is to really identify what those issues are, and also to understand what information do we have already that can help us to respond to the issues and get clarity. And again, the one thing that's really important, this is not just CRMC doing this. We need your help and we need your input. So this is a group effort, and something that we need you to engage in, not only to identify the issues and express your concerns, but also to help us identify the data. So once that's done, and again, I will say this is iterative, and also these are just guiding timeframes. We will streamline some of this, and we'll be more efficient on other aspects as well. So we're saying in the fall, the idea is to identify some solutions to some of the issues that have been identified. If many of you remember last time we met, some people were suggesting you should look at the way Massachusetts permits its aquaculture, or other places in the state, Virginia, or the country, I should say, Virginia, for example, or this is the way they do it in other places, or aquaculture growers have to do this in other places and it seems to work well. So again, together with you all, the idea is in the fall really to focus on responding to those issues that were identified earlier on, and to figure out how can we respond to those issues effectively. As Jim mentioned, we are working directly with the working group, which is an ad hoc advisory committee, again, an informal process. So we don't have to call the Secretary of State to inform them that there's a meeting here. This is an informal process that CRMC is developing so you can be engaged in the process. So once we've identified the solutions, then we will then hone these final revisions so that, and get the bugs out and tweak the process so that it does respond to the concerns and issues identified by you all. And then in May is, and we're saying May, it might be April, it might be June, but during that time frame, the concept is that we will then begin that formal process where, again, as Jim mentioned, there will be 30 days where people can report or provide comment, and it'll be more official. And just to back up one more time is that during the 3 bullets from July to April 2022, we'll be working with the working groups. But as Jim mentioned, we will also be having public meetings where people can engage and interact, and to ensure that this process is transparent. So that is generally speaking the process that we're proposing, the time frame that we're proposing to develop this aquaculture element. So I'm trying to see if there are any questions from. Go ahead.
So Jen, just while you have this slide up,
Yeah.
And again, just reinforcing the fact that we are planning to have public workshops as these iterations of drafts are developed to get further public input. And we've done this with other rulemaking processes in the past, where we have a substantive rule, and before we initiate that formal rulemaking process under the Administrative Procedures Act, we do an informal process, and we do this, open public workshop process to get further feedback and do some refinement on the product that we want to move forward for rulemaking. So all of that will take place before we initiate the formal rulemaking process. And one thing I did want to mention from our last meeting, there was some discussion about, well, what data layers will you be looking at? And so Chris Damon here shortly will be sharing his screen and walking us through an online mapping product to show what data layers he's considered thus far. And we're seeking input here from the working group and other stakeholders as to data gaps. What data do we need to be considering that's out there and available that is not shown yet? But tonight is just an initial layer of less than 10 different data layers that Chris will walk us through.
So does anyone have any, thanks, Jim. Does anyone have any questions? Again, just put Q in your comment in the chat room, or would like to elaborate on anything. Any questions or thoughts? Okay, I'm not seeing any cues or comments. So we're going to go to the next part of the agenda, which is, again, as Jim just mentioned, we're going to talk about the different components of the aquaculture element. Jim, first, we're going to talk about the revised notification process, which you've sort of mentioned, but if you would like, do you have anything more to say on that one?
Well, the only thing I have to say is that we're working diligently to get this up as soon as possible. And again, you'll have the ability to go up to the CRMC homepage, crmc.ri.gov. It'll be prominently displayed on that front page, and you'll be able to click on that link and then sign up for this Rhode Island Aquaculture Listserv. What we will also try to do is to take existing email lists we have for specific aquaculture applications and migrate them into this listserv. So it'll be helpful for not only the public, but for our administrative staff, so that if someone says, hey, I want to be notified on this application, the staff will direct the inquirer to the webpage and say, just sign up there. You'll get notification of not only this application, but all applications relating to aquaculture in Rhode Island tidal waters. So again, We will get that up on our website as quickly as possible, and I do expect it in the next several days.
And to be clear, those of you who are in the working group will get specific notification as well through the SAMP, but we will not be, you know, for those who are sending emails, I want to know when the next working group meetings are, who are not in the working group. That's, you all are responsible for getting yourself on that listserv. Okay, so it's just there's been a lot of people asking for that, and we just can't keep track of those individuals. From now on, we will be sending them to this CRMC listserv. So and also to say, as working group members, we've invited you all to be a part of this, to help for discussion and express your concerns, but also we encourage you to also, if someone comes up to you and says, you know, what's going on with this working group, or what's going on, then it's an opportunity for you to say, well, you need to go to the CRMC website and sign up for this listserv. So there is a question, Jim, from one of the participants, Kenny Mendez. Once on this aquaculture listserv, how will this integrate with the MFC and other public meetings through town harbor commissions?
So good question. The Rhode Island Aquaculture listserv is for CRMC purposes, to notify folks about applications coming into the CRMC regulatory process. The Division of Marine Fisheries maintains a separate listserv, and it notifies folks about the Shellfish Advisory Panel and other marine regulatory changes, along with many other notices. So they're going to be separate. So it is possible that if you are signing up for the CRMC Rhode Island Aquaculture listserv, and you're also on the Marine Fisheries Council or DMF listserv, you may get redundant notices, but this way you won't miss notification. And we felt, for purposes of the CRMC, that creating this one all-inclusive email listserv for anything to do with aquaculture was the best way for us to get that notification out to people who are interested in knowing about meetings and pending applications and council actions on any applications.
Good question, though.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay. We're going to go to the next component of the aquaculture element, and that is the map aspect of this. And so we're going to ask Chris Damon from URI to take the lead on this. Chris just shared something on the chat room. Chris, you good?
I am good. So you can see the map, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so I posted the link to this online map in the chat room again. I know it's a duplicate, but in case anybody came in late, it's now there and available, and you can follow along, and hopefully it will not break this. I would ask you to bookmark this website, because while the map itself will change, this link should not. So as this is an iterative process and information will be added and subtracted, the link should stay the same, and you should always be seeing the most current version of the map. And what we're looking at was, we found, I am with a group here at the university called the Environmental Data Center, and we play with maps and data. And what we found is that in discussions, it is so helpful to have the ability to look at and provide context to some of the topics that are being discussed. So what we've done is put together a map of some constraints in this case that would potentially limit aquaculture development. And these are things such as shipping lanes and Department of Defense areas. But we've put them together in this online map, and I'm just going to briefly walk you through it. For those that have played with Google Maps, it should be a very similar and comfortable type of environment. And we've stripped away a lot of the excess stuff so that to keep it as simple as possible. But the map we're looking at, what you'll see is some of the constraints are turned on. And at this point, well, we'll get to that. On the left-hand side of the screen are a series of layers that can be turned on and off. And some of them, such as the eyeball or the mean low water line, if there's a hash mark through the eyeball, you can't see it. It's there, but all you have to do is turn it on and off, right? And so you can turn any of these layers on and off as needed. Some of them have been turned off and kept off for clarity. Data layers that have a little triangle next to them, like marine transportation, those can be expanded. They're an actual group of layers. So things that made sense to put together into a single group that you may want to turn on and off at one time. We have grouped them, in this case, marine transportation. And again, there are some layers within here that have a little cross through them, which means we're not displaying them, right? So marine transportation has things like danger zones or restricted areas, the dredge navigational channels, or navigation lanes that are listed in the NOAA nautical charts. Let me see, we have shellfish and harvest restrictions. Some layers that would appear in that group include marina locations, conditional closure areas for shellfish harvesting, and prohibited areas. And you'll notice that all the layers that we're looking at are symbolized in exactly the same way. And that was really done to provide some clarity, right? So that you're not trying to overlay all different colors and all different shapes. Everything is colored exactly the same way. But if you look at the map, darker areas are where multiple features overlap, okay? And if you click on the map in one of these areas, a couple things happen. The first is a window opens that has some basic information, and the let me go back. So you have some basic information, and this is telling you a couple things. The first is it's telling you that the layer of interest is in the marine transportation group over on the left-hand side of your screen. It is the layer, the danger zones or restricted areas. And for context, where we got that information, where we obtained the data is from the NOAA electronic nautical charts. And then some basic information about that specific polygon that you're seeing on the map. You will also, in some locations where they overlap, in this case, it's one of two. So there are two areas, potential restrictive areas that are overlapping. The first one is this danger zone or restricted area. The second is under the shellfish and harvest restrictions group, and that is a prohibited shellfishing area, and that information was obtained from DEM. So depending on where you're clicking on the map, you will get a different response. But in general, the darker orange, yellow, orange in area, the more features that overlap a given area. Another data set that I would like to mention, because it is also very good at providing context, and for this group may be very helpful when looking at some of these restrictive areas, is this this final layer called Raster Nautical Charts. And these are our digital representations of the nautical charts that we obtained from NOAA. And if we turn them on, you will see nautical charts across the entire area appear. One little, we don't control this data. This is put out by NOAA. But as you zoom in, this data layer is really best observed from when you zoom in closer on the map. Because as you zoom in, the chart that's displayed changes, right? So if you really want to dive in and look at a specific area, in this case, the navigation channel that's working up towards Providence, you can really see that on the nautical chart and see where the source of the information in the polygons that we're drawing on the map. But again, that is only really useful if you're zoomed in a particular area. And you know, I don't know if any questions are in the chat. I can't see any questions, but I think it's a pretty straightforward how this map works. I will say that again, this is a first cut. We pull together a handful of layers that in this case would be potential constraints for aquaculture activities. And this is open to modification. So I fully expect that layers will be added and layers will be removed based on the input that we're getting from the group.
So
And
again, if you have any questions, put the Q in the chat or in your ask your question in the question and answer panel. Chris, I have a question. If you wanted to know more about these specific layers, for example, the shellfish restricted areas, how do you really find out? What does that really mean? And how do you find out about what that means?
so for some of them, what is this one here? We can provide additional documentation on where these data layers are coming from. In this case, some of them actually bring you to URLs of the source data, so other web links. And in many instances, we do have those pieces of information available, but I did pull them out for this initial demonstration for clarity. But we can provide, if people have questions saying, hey, where does this shellfish harvest restriction prohibited areas that DEM produces, what is this layer? What does it mean? We can provide additional information and documentation for that layer. And it would probably be a note to myself. It would be a good idea if I pulled that information together and had it available as almost an appendix that people could use moving forward.
Great. I think that would be helpful, and we could also put it on the project website as well, in addition to this constraints link.
Okay.
Jim, can you explain what a hard constraint is? I know Chris did, but can you provide the CRMC perspective?
Sure. So as we can see with Chris zooming into the East Passage here, which is the focus of our meeting tonight, there appears to be a number of hard constraints. For example, the large polygon area there that Chris has his cursor over is a Department of Defense restricted area associated with Naval Station Newport and the torpedo range, along with use of submersible vehicles that the Navy tests. And so if you look at the federal statute relating to these restricted areas, it literally doesn't allow most commercial fishing activity. It doesn't allow any permanent structures in these areas. And certainly from our perspective, that would also eliminate the consideration of aquaculture within any of these federally defined areas for the Department of Defense. Other hard constraints, Chris mentioned, for example, the DEM shellfish restricted areas. So these would be areas that, because of bacteria levels, are either permanently closed because of their location near a sewage treatment plant outfall, or conditionally closed areas where there's rainfall restrictions associated with shellfish harvesting, and because of elevated bacteria levels after a rainfall event. Other hard constraints would be, other types of infrastructure. One example would be the marina perimeter limits. So where there are marina facilities in the state, most all of them have a defined boundary around that marina perimeter, delineating the structures, all the docks and the pilings and whatnot. Clearly, we would not be looking to approve a new aquaculture project in an area that's already being occupied by structures. So these are areas that would not be considered for aquaculture, new aquaculture lease areas. Chris, you've got an area there right below the bridge where you're showing the island there. What is that polygon right there? Oh, that's an eelgrass polygon.
Eelgrass from 2016, yes, the most current eelgrass coverage.
That is the most current, correct. And then just so folks are aware, the CRMC is working with the URI Environmental Data Center and the USGS, the US Geologic Survey, and new aerial photography took place back in June of this year, just last month, to obtain new eelgrass coverages for the state of Rhode Island. That data right now is being processed, and then we would expect later this winter, early spring, to have a new 2020 eelgrass map coverage. And so we'll be able to compare to the 2016 data layer and see where there might be eelgrass that has contracted or perhaps even expanded, or hopefully we're going to see new areas where there are eelgrass. And under the CRMC regulations for aquaculture leases, we do not authorize new aquaculture leases in areas where there is existing eelgrass. That's built into our regulations. So one of the things, Chris has shown a number of data layers here on this online viewer. By default, certain layers show up. Chris pointed out how you can open up other data layers and sub layers underneath. So what we would like for stakeholders to do is to look through this online viewer and identify any data gaps here that are not listed in the coverages here that Chris has within the viewer. If you know of a data set that exists that should be considered in this online viewer, by all means, we want to know about that. One example, last meeting we had, Scott McWilliams at URI had raised a point about potential waterfowl, important areas for birds, whether it's an area of high intensity nesting or feeding areas. And so we would hope that the work and research that URI has done, that we might gain some insights in that information. Let me give you one example. Let's say a small island in the bay, for example, Hope Island, might be an area of a big heron rookery and other shorebirds that are nesting on that particular island. Maybe it makes sense to have some type of a buffer, setback, if you will, off the island to minimize disturbance to this rookery, particularly during the spring, mating season and nesting and fledging and whatnot. So maybe there's a certain distance requirement around some of these smaller islands where there's high intensity birding. these are the kinds of pieces of information that will be helpful to us as we look at various data sets to consider for this mapping exercise. So if you know of data, please contact us and send your suggestions, comments to Ben Getch here at the CRMC, as well as Jen McCann at URI. And we'll make sure that that gets to the working group for consideration. And then, of course, with Chris doing his mapping magic, can integrate that data layer if there's one that exists.
Chris, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that is a very good summary. And I think just the fact that people understand that this is an iterative and a fluid process with this map, and layers will come and go. So, you know, nothing is, you know, quote unquote, cut in stone at this point.
Does anyone have any question for Chris or Ben or Jim on the map?
I have a question. Will you have a data layer that shows all of the CRMC designated public rights of way to the shore on as one of your data layers?
It is definitely on the list of what has been discussed. I did not pull that together for this particular application, but if people would like to see that, it can be added.
So Gary, why would you consider that a hard constraint, just to get some conversation going?
Not necessarily a hard constraint, but a matter of information for access to the shore. You know, proximity to one of the things that concerns me when I host these application for aquaculture in Portsmouth waters, the preliminary application. One of the things that I like to discuss is restrictions to, you know, public access and recreation to the shore, that if these aquaculture facilities go in and you know, restrict public recreation, I'd like to know it. And so it seems to me that these access points and proximity to, not necessarily as a hard constraint, but to have these access points, CRMC designated access points, be delineated or identified. It's a real hot button issue here in Portsmouth, that's for sure.
Yeah. No, Gary, you make a good point, and it's an easy enough layer to add into the map. As a matter of fact, the CRMC continues designating or going through the designation process for new public rights of way, so we can add newer ones as they are adopted by the council. But there is a robust data layer set, and that can certainly be added in there. So thank you for that comment.
But just for a clarifying point, though, and Chris, there is a mapping tool that is almost ready, which will be ready in September likely, called RI Shellfish, which provides a significant amount of data to help with all of the layers. I think what we're trying to do here, and Gary, you bring a good point up, because you're saying it's not necessarily a hard constraint, but you would like to be aware of it. So it's a question about should public, and this is discussion, so it should public access, is public access a hard constraint, or is it something that needs to be considered? Is it equivalent to the DOD or the navigational channels?
I think it's something that needs to be considered, not necessarily a hard constraint from a municipal standpoint. No matter what we do, the community is going to look at it as a consideration. So any extra help we can have in providing that information, I think, is important.
Caitlin, you have your hand up. Caitlin? And again, it's very hard for me to see
I was just
people's
going to
hands.
offer to that list. Oh, can you hear
Go
me?
ahead. Yes. Yes. Can you
hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. Caitlin?
I was just going to add the research reserve boundaries, subtitle boundaries.
Okay, we heard the reserve
Might
boundaries.
be having bandwidth issues. Going to add the research boundary as something to add
Okay.
to that list.
Is that a hard constraint?
The research.
Yeah,
So-
sorry, Chris. So Caitlin's referring to the Narragansett
They're
Bay.
listed as estuary.
I don't know where she's going.
Caitlin?
Yeah, so to that point, there are, for the research reserve, I did have some questions. It was discussed. I did have some questions on exactly what the boundaries were and maybe a depth or a bathymetric component to that, how far it extends. And so I will be following up with some questions so that boundary can be added properly.
And just so you know, I have at least 3 screens of people's faces. So I would really appreciate it if you could put the Q, your Q in the chat room so I can see that you're interested in saying something. Lisa Breyer, I saw your hand up, however. So Lisa, if you would like to say something, and then Donna, you can be next.
Thank you. I just put it in the chat that I agreed with the other municipalities that commented that public rights of way needs to be considered. And the way you described it as a hard constraint or a consideration, I would say it's probably a consideration. And a good example of that would be, in Jamestown, we have some aquaculture beds that are a distance from the shore, and we have other ones that are very close to the shore. And so if it was a public right of way, I would say it would be a consideration or maybe even a condition of approval to have that a little bit further away from shore so that access is not impeded.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll go to Donna then.
Okay, I just want you to know I still don't know how to use that system of Q at all.
Okay.
So anyway, having said that, I think it's imperative that the Rhode Island Constitution is invoked for the right of way. You can't act like it's not important. It's the most important thing to the rights of people for the right of way to the water. You can't make it secondary. You can't decide something's more important. I'm not understanding that thinking at all. It's very important that we remember what it says in the Rhode Island Constitution for number 17. And it should not be violated to the extent where people are losing the right of way to the water. And I'm still not understanding why there's this big push for one type of industry to be taking up all this time to promote this industry so that areas are maximized for this. I'm not getting it. I don't understand it.
Well,
Jim, do you want to talk a bit about the charge, CRMC's charge?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's a good point, Donna. And so first of all, rights of way to the shoreline are, of course, are very important. And so to the point that Gary and Lisa both raised, they certainly could be shown on this map because it will be important to know where those rights of way to get to the shoreline are located, whether it's a town right of way or a CRMC designated rights of way. We certainly have all the CRMC designated rights of way to the shore mapped in a point coverage. I'm not so certain about many of the town rights of way. So if towns have those coverages, we certainly could use those. But basically, to your point about the promotion, if you will, of aquaculture in waters of the state, remember that the CRMC's charge is to look at a balance of both protecting the resources, protecting the public interest, and promoting industry. And that's really what is in the charge in the Coastal Zone Management Act. So we try to find that balance. And so during the application review process, which begins with a preliminary determination before a formal application is even submitted, we go through that preliminary process to try and get as much stakeholder interest as possible. And that's one of the reasons why at the beginning of the meeting, and I'll repeat it here, that we want to make sure folks are well informed once the process with an aquaculture application starts. And so again, that begins with a preliminary determination. Right now, we send a notice to the town. A meeting is held with the town. Many towns advertise those meetings on their town website. And with the listserv that we are developing and people can sign up for, you'll get notices about those meetings. And so again, it's really about a balance of uses in the bay so that we are protecting the public's interest. And aquaculture is, one of those uses in the bay that are seen as a priority use within the bay under Rhode Island general laws. So we again look at the balance of uses so that it doesn't interfere with the free and common fishery and navigation and other uses within the bay.
One more thing, may I, Jenna? May I
Sure.
say, Jenna?
Sure.
I see, Mr. Boyd, that you're going to have a new notification, but from my perspective and from what I've heard from my constituents, it's not enough, and we are not going to accept that as the final answer. We want a butter notices for people, not taken by surprise, or they didn't sign up for something or didn't know they needed to sign up. It's the same as when someone put up a deck 2 streets away from me. Why, how would I know that they're going to put up a deck? I'm not going to look on the planning board, just an ordinary person.
Sure.
People are busy. I got a notice. I didn't have a problem. I actually looked at the house and I didn't have a problem, but I was notified, and this is what we want. And one other thing, we need more help like Charlestown had with their harbor plan. We don't have a plan and we need help. And it looks like looking into what they had is not only they have an MOU, they also, and put it in their harbor management plan, they also have an extensive management plan. It looks like they got help from the CRMC.
Well, that's very true. And the CRMC assists every municipality with their harbor management plans. We have a staff person dedicated to harbor management planning, Kevin Q.
Okay.
And to your point about notice, I agree. We understand that a lot of shoreside property owners want to receive notice. The question is how best to do that. Right now, the immediate solution we have is if you want to get notified about any aquaculture application coming through the CRMC, you'll have the opportunity to sign up for this listserv and you will get notification. The issue right now for us is, let's say an aquaculture application is proposed along the shoreline in Jamestown, for example. The question is, which shoreline property owners should be notified? Within 1,000 feet, within a mile, within 2 miles? We don't have the ability to get all those property owners. And then sometimes the listing on the property might be different from the actual owner. So we think at least right now, and we're certainly open to suggestions as to how to improve that notification process. So we'd be looking for suggestions to do that. We're hoping to work through the towns, which we do right now when we provide notification, not only on the preliminary determination, but also the formal application process. And again, with the aquaculture listserv, we're hoping, at least in the interim, it will provide people the ability to get notification. And we're open to other suggestions as to how to improve that notification process. So please send your suggestions.
Thank you, Donna. Are there any other questions that others have related to what we've been talking about? You guys are awfully quiet today.
You know what, Jen, I just want to follow up. Kenny Mendez had sort of a follow-up question about notices to the Marine Fisheries Council because the Marine Fisheries Council needs to provide to the CRMC an opinion as to whether or not a proposed aquaculture application essentially would determine. So the Marine Fisheries Council just needs to determine whether an aquaculture project is consistent with the competing uses engaged in the exploitation of marine fisheries. That's their sole charge in providing an opinion to the CRMC. And I think Kenny was getting at was, well, will I get notification of Marine Fishery Council meetings on the Rhode Island Aquaculture Listserv? That's not our intent. Our intent is to have people be notified of the CRMC process. We want to keep it clean and simple so that you get notification on any application process, council meeting associated with aquaculture that's going through the review process with the CRMC. The Marine Fisheries Council maintains their own agendas. There's multiple items on an agenda. It might include an aquaculture application, but you can get notification of those meeting notices by signing up on the DEM Division of Marine Fisheries notification list. So you'll have notification as necessary for each of those two processes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's go to the third element of the aquaculture element, and that is Ben is going to give us a summary of that, and that is the enhanced navigational and aesthetic guidelines or standards. Ben?
Hi. Yeah, I'm
Hi.
Ben Getch, Aquaculture Coordinator. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so our third element is going to be what we're calling enhanced navigational or aesthetic guidelines, standards. And it's going to be, we're going to consider the expertise from other states, other regions, aquaculture growers, the industry, our municipal representatives, other members here of the group. And CRMC is looking to enhance our existing guidelines, policies and standards in order to minimize the impact of aquaculture on existing and future uses. Some of the topics may include incorporating additional practices to reduce visual impact of gear types, enhance the maintenance and operation procedures for the farms, and improve navigational systems. Some of the kind of specific examples of what some of these standards might be minimum distances for different types of gear. So I think we'll probably be looking at the different types of aquaculture that is performed in the bay. Some of maybe the newer types of technologies that are out there that have been incorporated or recently being incorporated into some existing farms. Looking at those impacts in what distance from what types of features would make the most sense as a guideline or as a standard in our program. One of the things about aquaculture in recent years, it's been kind of an adoption of more floating gear technologies. You can kind of separate aquaculture into maybe three broad categories. One is a bottom plant, direct bottom planting of oysters on the ground or on the seafloor, and that has the least amount of impact as there's no gear placed there. There's simply just animals on the bottom within the four corners of the lease. And then you have maybe submerged gear, which can be also cover quite a variety of different types, but most commonly it might be like something very similar to a lobster pot that is set in a depth of water that's sufficient to allow for perhaps a boat traffic or other types of activities to still occur at the surface. Submerged gear can also be used in shallower areas. One of the things we don't encourage or we don't allow currently is any type of aquaculture that extends into the intertidal zone. So that's an existing policy we have currently. As far as navigational concerns go, we have some existing policies and practices, particularly surrounding floating gear that would incorporate, say, solar-powered lighted buoys on the corners to aid in nighttime navigation, with maybe also incorporating a high flyer radar reflector on that corner marker as well. So you have multiple aids to navigation in that case in poor weather or poor visibility or at night. And some of the other standards or guidelines we might explore might have to do with engineering, anchor systems, things like that. But yeah, that's basically in a nutshell what we're looking at as in addition to the map. We may be looking at in developing recommendations to CRMC to adopt new guidelines or standards based on the working group input and expertise.
Thank you, Ben.
So Ben, just to expand a little bit more on that. So you explained basically three types of aquaculture: bottom plant, cages on the bottom, and then floating gear. Regardless of the methodology used, there's still requirements for marks, basically corner markers, if you will, around the lease area. And so the question is, what types of corner markers are the best to provide for safe navigation, particularly at night or in foggy conditions, for example? So that's one of the things that could be considered, along with the aesthetics of different types of floating gear. And let's face it, the technology in aquaculture has certainly come a long way in the last couple of decades. Many years ago, when the CRMC first started permitting aquaculture in the 70s, it was just bottom plant. That's all aquaculture was just bottom planting, and that methods are evolving. Who knows 10 years from now what the aquaculture methodology might be? It may be far less visually unobtrusive. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, and particularly with the navigational, aids, corner markings, that was something that was explored in the previous aquaculture working group over 10 years ago. And there was quite a bit of back and forth in discussion at that time of the trade-offs between having sites well marked and not contributing more to the visual impact of the farm. So there was never really any standard that was developed beyond just the requirement to have your four corners marked. Our council does consider each application currently on its own, and when appropriate, will stipulate different types of markings where appropriate.
If I can add something to that, for the Coast Guard standpoint, that would be considered like a private aids to navigation payton. In our district office that deals with the payton, they can give you all kinds of information for markings for aids at night for things like that.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe some of our farms that have these types of markings are registered with the Coast Guard.
Yes, any kind of payton you establish like that has to be approved and registered through the district office.
Erin, could you please introduce yourself? You're a new face, so we want to welcome you here.
Erin Artis, I am with the Waterways Management Division for the Coast Guard in the East Providence office. Happy to be here and be a part of this group. Not quite a subject matter expert on the Narragansett Bay waterways, but I'm definitely learning. So
Great.
Thank
Thank
you. Yep. Thank you, Erin, for joining us.
thank you for having me.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments?
Jennifer, I just want to go back to Donna Cook. She had indicated she was looking for some help with harbor management planning, and I'm sorry, I don't know what community you're speaking of, but you know, we'd be happy to get you connected with our harbor management planning specialist.
I'm from Tiverton.
Tiverton,
I'm a
okay.
counselor.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it depends if the Harbor Commission is open to that. I can't tell them what to do.
Sure,
I'm the
understood.
liaison, but I would hope that whenever there's help offered, that people take it.
Yeah,
You know?
well, again, we do have we do have a subject matter expert for harbor management planning, and we'd be happy to connect you with him, Kevin Cute, to assist the town in that matter.
Okay, I would appreciate knowing all that information. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay.
Gary?
Yes, I want to put in give Kevin Cute an attaboy. We just did our harbor management plan back in 2018, 19, and he was superb resource for getting that done, and in editing and directing what should be in the plan and so forth. He's just top notch. Perfect.
Thank you for that, Gary. I know Kevin put a lot of time in that one, working with you and others in the town of Portsmouth. But
it was a hard fight.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So unless anyone else has any comments or thoughts, we're going to move to concluding this meeting. Roger? Yep, go for it, Roger. And you are muted.
Okay, I just have a quick question about the mapping. Along with the CRMC right-of-way spot that you have marked on the map, will the private and public boat ramps be also marked or indicated?
Yes, that was also discussed as layers that people would potentially want. And so it is already on the list for potential ads, yes.
Both public and private?
Not private. I don't know where we would get that information. We don't have a source for that. So it would be the public, primarily the DEM ramps, and if we have any ramps specific to marinas, those locations.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Roger, just a question. Can you define what you mean by a private ramp? You mean at a marina facility or something else?
Just for as an example, at Allen's Harbor, there's a boat ramp there that's owned by Safe Sea or Seatow. It's a dirt ramp. It was right into the channel right by Little Allen's Harbor. I mean, it's a boat ramp. It's not open to the public, but it's used by the Safe Sea or Seatow. I guess it's Seatow.
Yeah. Well, I know there is a public boat ramp there in Allen's Harbor. That certainly would be included.
Yes, but I'm just wondering, sometimes people have a oceanfront property or waterfront property, and maybe they use a dirt ramp or whatever. I was just wondering if that would be something that would show up.
Yeah. Well, as Chris indicated, we wouldn't have a data source to capture all of those in one data source. So I think it would be difficult to identify those, but certainly all the public launch ramps, the ones that DEM has a data set for, as Chris indicated, we certainly can add those in.
Okay, thank you.
I have just sent the link to other panelists, other participants. I hope you guys saw that. If not, we will put them, we will send the link out. Have people been able to access the link? Who's been able to access the link of the maps, the constraints map? Great. Rich, do you want to, what did you see? Or what do you think?
The link is great as far as the breakdown of the areas. I did send you a quick note on I think it's a private channel from the top end of Jamestown to Quonset and Davisville that was missing on the navigable channels. It's marked, but it's not federally maintained. So.
Chris, do you need any more information on that?
No, I don't think so. I'm aware of that, and one of them was missing out of our data set, but I did not have time to go on the nautical chart and digitize it.
Okay.
Sorry, Jen. So, what Rich just brought up is an example of a data gap. So if as you're looking through the online viewer that Chris has made available here, if you see data gaps, information that you think are important here, please bring them forth to us so that they can be included in this process.
Jim, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, no, I will just add that, up until this point, well, through the entire process, we're, as much as possible, we're not looking to go out and create new data, right? We're trying to pull from authoritative sources. So some of these private areas may never really show up to everybody's satisfaction across the state, because there's not a concerted effort to go out and do all of the surveying that would require to incorporate that. So again, if what we're putting in is only as good as the source information, and if something's missing, let us know, and we will do our best to incorporate it.
We were talking about the mooring fields from the harbors. Is that right, Chris?
That is right. I do not have the boundaries of harbor management plans or mooring fields. And so, if that information exists within specific towns, please let us know, and I will bring that in as I'm able to. But I don't have that in my little data sources.
Great. We have another question from Kenny Mendez. Jim, I don't know if you see it, but if areas are underrepresented by aquaculture, does this mean they will be targeted for more aquaculture?
I'm assuming by what Kenny means by underrepresented. In other words, on the map that Chris showed this evening, if there's a blank spot in the middle of the bay, I'm assuming that's what he means by underrepresented. Does this mean that they will be targeted for more aquaculture? That remains to be seen. This is the data layers that Chris is showing tonight is just the first step. The very first iteration of a map. And so there'll be more data layers to consider. And then the areas that shake out, if you will, those areas may be considered for future aquaculture activity, but there's still a lot more thought that needs to go into additional data layers and any criteria that we might use for the review of aquaculture applications.
Okay. Last call. I know many of you know what that means. Okay. We're going to end. We're going to talk about next steps. I just put in, you all received this in in an email back as far as the next meetings that will be taking place. Again, the idea is to, I mean, obviously this was a more general conversation, but we were, our intent was to reach out and focus on the East Passage. On August 2nd, we will have a meeting, same format, same agenda, talking about the West Passage. And then also August 12th, we'll talk about the Sakonnet River. And so we will send out the link to the working group people, you guys, all of you. And then we will also send the link through the RI Aquaculture listserv. So again, if there are people you know who are interested in participating in this process, we encourage them to sign up to that listserv so we can make this meeting available to them. The other thing that we talked about, which we would appreciate your input on is, and we've been getting a lot of it during this meeting, so that's wonderful, is more data layers information concerning, again, hard constraints. And, you know, for example, Chris was saying, you know, mooring fields are pretty much hard constraints, but we don't have that data. So we don't have that data digitized. So we would appreciate that information. Caitlin brought up potentially, you know, critical habitat areas for conservation that could potentially be hard constraints. So if there are any other layers that we have not identified, you know, please send them along to us. And that's all I have to say. Jim, is there something, could you take us out with a song? No, take us out, please.
You don't want to hear me sing, Jen.
No, I don't.
But I do want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and getting the first look at the aquaculture element online mapper that Chris Damon at the URI Environmental Data Center has put together. And again, we're looking for your recommendations of other existing data layers or gaps that Chris may not have listed yet or that we're considering. So please send them along. We will certainly notify you all as soon as the Rhode Island Aquaculture Listserv is up and active. And again, we're hopeful that's going to be in the next several days. We're still working with the state IT people to get it up and functional and make sure we can test it and we get the proper responses back and that you're on this listserv. So this will be our catch-all, all-inclusive for CRMC, aquaculture, applications, meetings, etc. So please make yourself available to that and sign up when we do alert you to that. So thank you all very much, and we'll look forward to seeing many of you on August 2nd and August 12th. Again, August 2nd, the West Passage, and August 12th, the Sakonnet River. And again, we want this to be an inclusive process, and you know, we're trying to be as open and transparent as possible here. And that's going to include these public workshops. Once we've got enough data layers pulled together and we have a good idea of where the mapping effort is going, and then we'll conduct some public workshops. Hopefully, it's at a time, you know, particularly this winter or, you know, late winter, early spring, where we can actually meet in person, like at the URI Bay campus, like in Corliss Auditorium, for example, where we've held many public workshops. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted on developments as they come along. So thank you all very much.
Excuse me, guys, I'm sorry. I got one last question.
Dave, go ahead, please.
All right, it's a very quick one. And I know you were talking about hard constraints and things of that nature is on this map, which I thought was fantastic. You guys did a fantastic job on that. Is there going to be a type of a user conflict type of a thing with the different fisheries that maybe draggers and shellfish fishermen and things like that? Will that be part of this mapping process as well? I know we're talking hard constraints as far as, you know, landmarks and mooring fields and things like that. But is there going to be another layer on top of that, which will help expedite if a person comes in and they say, hey, I want to put a lease over here? Well, no, because draggers typically run that route or whatever. Is that part of this process as well?
Dave, the short answer is yes. The question is, how are we going to get there? Because, you know, there's limited GIS data layers that actually say, you know, this lane here is where the draggers work. We know that different fisheries, of course, operate in different areas of the bay at different times of the year, depending on the fishery. Some fisheries are pretty consistent where they operate. Bull raking, for example, as you well know. So yes, the issue is how best to represent it on a map like the one you've seen this evening. So that's something that we want to continue to discuss and figure out the best way to transform that information into a data layer. I think it's something that our colleagues at Division of Marine Fisheries will be able to help us with as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Can we end now, Dave?
You know, I'm going to have questions at 7 o'clock tonight. I'm going to be
Okay.
emailing all of you people.
All right. Sounds
Thanks,
good.
sorry.
No worries.
Email them along, Dave. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. We're good. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, everyone.